In this video, we will have a look at Azure Conditional Access. Conditional Access is a functionality of Azure Active Directory that allows you to enforce access control to applications in your environment based on the conditions you have configured. It's an additional layer of security for when someone is logging in and it looks at the signals within your conditional access policy. So the username and the password is authenticated, but then it looks at these signals within the configured policies to see what else it needs to enforce. And conditional access has been purposely built for the cloud, and it gathers all of these sets of information, details, or signals they're called. Things such as the login behavior of users and the conditions you set, and then it makes decisions and enforces access control based on the configured policies. In its simplest form, they are like the if-then statements. So for example, if the user wants to access something important, they must log in using multi-factor authentication. So assuming specific conditions have been met, it allows you to access the applications, which is all controlled from a central location. Now we have an example on the screen. And this example here is showing that if a user is a HR user, so you can see the if and then statements. If a user is a HR user and it wants to use a sensitive application, the applications are on the right hand side here, within a trusted IP range, so you can set up trusted locations, IP ranges, or via countries as well. Then it does some actions. So the one I've got here is to allow access. So allow access providing they are required to provide multi-factor authentication. So they authenticate using a different method. Usually this is a mobile phone. And also providing the device is compliant as well. It's a compliant device. Then provide them access to the sensitive applications. And you can create all sorts of these policies based on the users and the devices you have in your network. Next, we will have a look at the conditional access policies within the portal. But it pretty much looks like this down here. So all of these options here. And we can see the if, which is the assignments we pick. So if we assign these, then take these actions, which is the access control section. And these are all the policy configuration options down here. So let's start on the left hand side. And so the if, which is the assignment, can be made up of users or workload identities, which is these over here, which I'll go into more detail within the portal itself. Or it can be made up of cloud applications or actions, or authentication contexts, which is down here actually. It's all listed here. Or it can be made up of a certain set of signals as well, which is known as conditions. All of these here. So if these are assigned, then undertake the following actions, which is on the right hand side here. And this section is whether we grant them control. So usually it's grant or block. But if you grant them access, then you can also do any of these sub actions here as well. And on the right hand side here is how we control the session itself. So how we limit the user experience using session control. So how we can enforce a bit more security within the session itself. Again, we will have a look at these options within the portal. So if I drag the portal into the screen, and we can have a look at the policy configuration options as well as some other options as well to do with conditional access. So you can search for it from here, or we can hit the three lines down here and go to all services and then to the identity option. And from here we can choose Azure AD conditional access. It's also available from Azure Active Directory. So we can go back to all services, choose Azure Active Directory, and then within here we can go to the security option here. Then under protect, we've got conditional access. And over here we can create a new policy from scratch, which we will be doing, but we also have the option to use a new policy from template, which helps you build a policy using a template. So you can build a policy easily based on your requirements. And over here it gives you two options. So select a template category, and we can base it on identities or devices. So they're the two main categories. And if you select identities and we hit next here, you can see all the options in relation to identities. You can see here it's got multi-factor authentication, block legacy authentication, require multi-factor authentication for all users. Down here you've got require password change for high risk users. So it does say here, we recommend the following templates based on your response. So these are the ones Microsoft has seen as mostly commonly used templates. If we go back again to previous, we can select devices instead and have a look at the templates for devices, made for devices. And we can see all of them here, like block access for unknown or unsupported device platform, or require approved client applications and application protection. Use application enforced restrictions for unmanaged devices. But what we are going to do is create a brand new policy from scratch instead. So let's go back to conditional access and discard these changes. Hit conditional access again and go to new policy from here. So we will give it a policy name, first policy. You can create many of these policies. You would typically create policies for specific things, like a policy for sign-in risks, a policy for user risks, a policy for devices, a policies for certain groups of users. So you would create a number of these policies based on the requirements you need for your users and devices. And there are two main elements, which are the assignments and the controls. So we can see the assignments here. That's the main section, and that includes these here. So user or workload identities, cloud applications or actions or conditions. And then there's access controls, which is made up of grant and session. Assignment allows you to assign it to whatever you want, such as users or workload identities, applications or combination of them as well. And you can apply some conditions from here. Just another point on policies. You can create many of these policies, and more than one policy can be applied to a user at any given time. So for example, if a policy requires MFA and another policy requires the device platform to be Windows and Linux only, then both policies must be met. And this includes the assignment within the policies as well. All the assignments configured must be met. So let's have a look at the assignments now. We can assign users or workload identities, and this consists of users and groups. Policies can be targeted to include or exclude all users, specific users, directory roles, or external guest users, and also workload identities. So we've got workload identities here, which are the applications, service principals, and managed identities. So you can see all own service principals here, or select service principals. We can select the service principals we want. And the user and group is a mandatory requirement in a conditional access policy, so you have to specify something. So you can either select all users or select specific users and groups. And you've also got the option to exclude users as well, which is a really good idea if you want to exclude your break glass administrator accounts, so you don't lock yourselves out. Back to workload identities. And a service principal is an identity that has been created for use with applications and managed identities in the same way a user principal is created for users. So it can include or exclude service principals over here. Now moving on to cloud applications or actions. We can include or exclude cloud applications here as well, like Office 365 and SharePoint, etc. And there's a list of what is supported, so you would need to check that out, or you can click on select apps here. For example, on the right hand side we can see the selected apps we can choose from, or you can base it on all cloud applications or none as well. Going back to assignments, obviously we can do the same thing for that. So if we go to users and groups, we can see the specific select users and groups down here. So we've also got the sub options of select all guest and external users, directory roles, and users and groups as well. So if I select users and groups, I can see my users and groups on the right hand side. So I've got my users here and I've got my groups over here. But if we go back to the cloud apps or actions, we've also got in the top menu, if I bring that down, we've got user actions as well. And what this is, so usually we are targeting applications as we want to have certain conditions that are met by users when accessing these applications. But we can also target user actions. And there are two user actions which are tasks performed by the users. The top one is called register security information. And the other action that can be performed by a user is the register or join devices. Now with register security information, this is a combined registration for multi-factor authentication, so it will enroll you to use multi-factor authentication. Let me reset my, refresh my Azure portal. Seems to have bombed out on me. And I'm back on the user actions. So with register security information, this is a combined registration for multi-factor authentication and self-service password reset. So it will enroll you to use multi-factor authentication, but another common thing that is required and is needed as part of a remediation step is for users to reset their own passwords. So it enrolls you to reset your own passwords as well. So it's a combined registration for these two features. And when you register for these, you might want to enforce conditional access policies, and this is the reason why it's here. So why would you enforce register security information in a conditional access policy? Well, a lot of organizations enforce users to register from a trusted location. So you would only be able to register for these from a secure, trusted location. It might be the organization's offices themselves. And the way you would set this up is you would use conditions, which we will be having a look at next. So if we have a quick look, we would select conditions and then we would select locations from here. We can even select any location. So configure, yes, include any location over here. And what we can do is exclude. So we can hit all trusted locations here. And what this would do is if we go to access control over here, grant, we can block access. So what we are saying here is we are blocking access, excluding the trusted location. So we are blocking access from anywhere unless it's a trusted location. So that's a good way of setting this policy up. And it's a good example of how to use the include and the exclude options. Let's cross this off. If we go back to Cloud Apps or Actions and go and untick this again, we've got another option in here and it's called Authentication Context. And without going too deep into this, with authentication contexts, it can be used to further secure data and actions in applications. These applications can be your own custom applications, custom line of business applications, applications like SharePoint, or applications protected by Microsoft Defender for cloud apps. So you may want to secure it because it's got sensitive data inside it and require only access from a particular managed device using multi-factor authentication. And maybe you might want to enforce the users to agree to terms as well of use. So that's why you would use the authentication context. And just to go back one step, because I forgot to mention what the other user action was, register or join devices. So with register or join devices, this user action enables administrators to enforce conditional access policy when users register or join their devices to Azure Active Directory. Is to provide your users with support for bring your own devices, BOID, BYOD, or some other mobile device scenarios, and you might want to enforce some conditions for these devices as well. And then we've got the conditions as the last part of the assignment of what we want to assign. So if we go to conditions, and we have 6 conditions in total. User risk is the first one. So with user risk, user accounts that may have compromised credentials, and you can configure the user risk from here. And you can choose how aggressive you want to be from here. So you can have high, medium or low, or a combination of these as well. Click on yes, and then we can specify which ones we want. So general recommendation here is to use a high threshold during policy rollout and then use a low threshold for better security later down the line. Then we've got on the left hand side here is sign-in risk. So we can specify our sign-in risk. With sign-in risk, these are both Azure AD Premium P2 features, by the way. So you need a P2 license for user risk and sign-in risk. And with sign-in risk, you can configure the aggressiveness of your levels of risk here as well. So you've got high, medium, low or no risk from here. The next one down is device platforms. With device platforms, you can enforce specific policies based on the device platform itself, or that are marked with a specific state as well. It can be used when enforcing conditional access policies. You can enforce specific policies based on the device platform. So we can see here, we may want to enforce policies for our mobile devices. So we may specify Android and iOS, or even maybe our laptops and desktops. So we might include Windows, macOS and Linux and specify particular actions for those as well. And then we've got Locations, I'll show you in a second where this is fully configured, so we can specify the locations from another part of the portal. So from here what we can do is configure it, and we can include and exclude, and we've got any locations, all trusted locations or selected locations. Now all trusted locations is the locations we trust, and I'll show you where we configure this from. We've got selected locations, so you can select locations as well. So these are some of the locations I've already specified, I've already created, and I will show you that in a second. And you can also use geolocation by choosing the countries and regions you want to apply within the policy as well. Let's click no here. You can also do this based on client applications as well. This is the software the user is using to access the cloud applications. For example, your browser, or it could even be an app on your mobile device or desktop, so we can see them from here, your browser here. Or it can be your mobile app and desktop clients. Or it could be you want to block everyone from using legacy authentication clients, so you might want to do that. And then the last one is filter for devices. Now this is quite a powerful feature. So filter for devices is where you can specify specific filters for devices such as the operating system or the manufacturer for the device. For example, if we go to configure here and we have a look at the options, we can add an expression from here, and we've got these operators. We've got an AND or an OR, so we can specify the property from here. Let's say we want the device to be compliant, and we want the device to be a particular platform as well, or a manufacturer. Let's say we want the device to be a manufacturer which equals the value of Dell. And we can go on with this, so we can create lots of different types of expressions, and then we can enforce access control on them. If we have a look again at the properties, we can see there's lots of options inside here. Device ID, display name, device ownership, and the list goes on. Operating system, profile type, trust IP. I guess these are custom extension attributes as well here. And then the operators, we have quite a number of different operators, so there's a lot of good flexibility within this feature. So with this feature you can really fine-tune which devices you want to target, maybe specific devices that you allow or specific devices you want to block. So it's definitely a great feature to familiarize yourselves with. And by the way, you can use a combination of all of these as well. So again, what I mean by that is if the location is within the trusted locations and it's a specific device, do the following from this section here, access control. Moving on to access control, we've got the grant section. So in the grant section here on the right hand side, we can see we can either block access. When we block access, you can't do anything more. As you can see, when I ticked on require multi-factor authentication, it automatically selected the grant access from the block access. You can grant access and you can do any of the following from here. At the bottom here it's got require all of the selected controls, or you can require one of the selected controls. Going back to the top, if you block access, it will block all access, so you might create yourselves more problems because someone has to do something to give that user access again. You've got lots of flexibility to allow the user to remediate themselves. So the options we have is to require multi-factor authentication, and this is typically done using their mobile phone or another form of authentication. Then there is the authentication strength, and this one is for users to use a authentication method, a specific authentication method based on the authentication strength policies applied. And then we've got require device to be marked as compliant, and this is in relation to Intune, which is their mobile device management solution. So it's got to be compliant within Intune, so it says it there, device must be Intune compliant. If the device is non-compliant, the user will be prompted to bring the device under compliance. And then we've got all these other options as well. Require hybrid Azure Active Directory join device, require approved client app. So there's got to be a client app on the device itself. Device must use these client applications, and you can see a list of them from here. And then there's require application protection policy. Device must use protected applications, and we've got a specific list for that over here as well. Or the user must require a password change, so the user must change their password. We can also control the session on the left hand side here. If we select session, discard the changes, you can control the session, and on the right hand side we can see the options. So the first option here is use app enforced restrictions. So for this, and with this you can pass device information to cloud applications, which allows the cloud application to know if a connection is from a compliant or a domain joined device. And this means it knows whether a device is fully managed or whether it's compliant or not. Because if it's not fully managed or if it's not compliant, it gives it a more limited experience for security reasons. Use conditional access application control. With this feature, you can route users to Microsoft Defender for the users, groups, cloud applications, etc. And you can choose where you can protect the data further, like you can prevent them from data exfiltration, monitor user sessions, and so on. So again, another way of securing the session itself. Then there's sign-in frequency. It's the time period before a user is asked to sign in again when attempting to access a particular resource. And then there's persistent browser session. So with persistent browser session, it allows a user to remain signed in after closing and reopening their browser. And then there's customized continuous access evaluation. Now this feature, it allows for evaluating the policies but in real time. So if there's changes, it could impact your access. So if you change locations or something like that. Technically speaking, tokens are revoked in real time rather than waiting for them to expire. So that's how it technically works in the background. And then the last one is to disable resilience defaults. With this option, if a policy cannot be evaluated due to an outage, access is determined by the resilience settings. And if resilience defaults are disabled, access is denied once existing sessions expire. And then down here we've got enable policy. So we've got report only, or turn the policy on, or leave the policy off. And reporting is really good to check what it would have done if it was enforcing, so that you have a chance to fine tune your policies before you accidentally block a bunch of users, for example. So it's a really good feature to use before you can actually start enforcing policies. It's a bit like the intrusion prevention systems and the intrusion detection systems, where intrusion detection systems detects and reports on the stuff it's found, where prevents it. So it won't block anything, but it will tell you what it would have blocked if you did have the policy turned on. Now looking at the other conditional access policies that complements the policy itself, if we go out of this and go to the conditional access main page, on the left hand side we've got some managed options. So we've got the named locations here. This is where you set up the locations. You can specify your trusted or untrusted locations here. You can do by country or IP address range and then apply them within the policy itself. So you can do the country locations from here, and then you can give it a name and you can specify the countries. Maybe it's your trusted locations, and this is where you would do all this from. So that's the countries, and then you've got the IP range locations as well. So you can do that from here as well. Configure the IP addresses within here. And then we've got terms of use as well. So with terms of use, we can set up a terms of use here to enforce users to accept the terms. We've got some options actually, so you can enforce them, but you can see the options in here. So we've got the terms of use document. You can apply a document, require users to expand the terms of use, require users to consent on every device, expire consent, etc. So you can turn these on and further configure them here. Going back to the conditional access overview page, we've got VPN connectivity, so we can apply certificates to remote users so that their devices are trusted by your organization. So it's one way of establishing authentication, certificate-based authentication, making sure that the device is trusted. And we've got Authentication Context as well. You can configure that from here to secure application data and actions in applications like SharePoint and Microsoft Cloud Application Security. So these are the configuration steps you would take for that. Now there's a few best practices for configuring conditional access policies, and one is to configure different policies. So you would configure different policies for your sign-in risk, and then you would configure a different policy for your user risk. So you'd keep them as their own policies. And then you would configure different policies for your groups of users. Also, do not use both the identity protection policy rules and the conditional access rules. Just use one or the other. When I say identity protection policy rules, it's these ones here. So if we go back to Azure go back to Active Directory, under security, we can see that there's identity protection in here as well. So identity protection has these default policies here, user risk policy, sign-in risk policy. So these two conflict with the conditional access policies. So if we go to conditional access policies, within the new policy conditions, we can see the same ones here, user risk and sign-in risk over here. So don't use both of them, use one or the other, otherwise you will have conflicting issues. For risk levels, use a high threshold during policy rollout and then use a low threshold for better security later down the line. Keep things as simple as possible, document what you've changed and why you've changed it. And finally, it's good to have a break glass admin account without any multi-factor authentication enforcement, just in case you lock yourselves out and you need to log in with this break glass admin account.